This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming.
Technical difficulties. Morning, everyone. Jack Show. I'm Jamie Pax filling in for Mac today, and Hall of Fame boxing writer Jack Hirsch. How's everybody doing this morning?
Good, Pax. I got about
a little bit
75
bad this morning.
A little technical difficulty here right off the bat. You're like the 76ers having a technical foul called on them at the beginning of the game. What Sergeant Carter used to say in Gomer Pyle, I can't hear you.
There we go. I think we're getting it figured out. Coming up. Are we good?
Well,
we're ending good. Okay.
Pax,
I believe so.
Viewers in the beginning.
Well, they're back. We had a viewer, and now he's back. We're good now. All right, perfect. Sometimes it takes a second. I don't know exactly what occurred just there, but now we're back, and we're cooking with gas. You know, and not using any sticky stuff.
You said you weren't going to lead in with the Matt Scherzer story, but there you go.
I wasn't going to, but I had to make a joke about it. Because it is the Mets messing it up.
For those of you who are unaware, Matt Scherzer got kicked out of yesterday's game against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The umpires determined he had some sticky stuff inside his glove, which, of course, if you reach in and you put it on the ball, it might, I don't know what it does to help, the ball. Does it deaden it? Does it help it spin? I have no clue. But nevertheless, there was a controversy involved. And the umpires claimed they warned Scherzer earlier not to use that glove. And he came back out with the glove, according to the umpires. So maybe the umpires had, due reason, for the ejection. Because if you do want to play about something and you warn him once, don't do this. And then he does it, even though the player might feel he's innocent, that he corrected the problem or whatever his mindset is. You can't do it once the umpire warned you. They ejected Scherzer. Now, then Scherzer turns around and he swears on his kids' lives that there was no hanky-panky on his part. So that's a pretty strong, statement by Scherzer. But as it turned out, the Mets, Scherzer was pitching well. I think it was the fourth inning, and then the Mets bullpen came in. They did a good job against the Dodgers. Mets won the game. No harm done. But I think that this situation is going to have to get revisited so it doesn't happen again. It's going to have to be looked into. Were the umpires in there for kicking him out? Did Scherzer try to do something illegal the second time? Because if he did, it should be more than just being kicked out of the game. It should be maybe a small suspension, a fine, or whatever. But listen, Max Scherzer is a great pitcher.
There's an 80-game suspension.
Oh, 80?
80-game suspension with that. He is suspended for 80 games right now.
Not Max Scherzer.
Yes,
no.
Max Scherzer. 80
did that just
suspension.
Did that just come in? I didn't hear it. No, that's not an 80-game suspension for having sticky stuff in your gloves. He hasn't gotten suspended, Pax. Where are you getting?
I heard it was an 80-game suspension with what occurred because of the way that he argued with the umpire and all that other stuff.
Now let me tell you, with the players' union being what it is, Scherzer could have gone back in the dugout grabbed the bat and thrown it at the umpire, and he wouldn't get 80 games. Well, he did not get a suspension. Nothing was
10
handed.
game. 10 game.
10
Automatic
games?
10 game. An automatic 10 game suspension.
That's a rule, but it hasn't been handed down to him.
It doesn't
Let's
matter.
see
It's automatic. It's automatic. The moment that an umpire kicks somebody out for an illegal substance, it's an automatic 10 game suspension.
But he can appeal it, and also you got to keep something in mind. For a pitcher like Max Scherzer, a 10-game suspension in reality is missing one start. It's not like a position player who 10 games, that stings. A position player who has to miss 10 games. A pitcher like Max Scherzer, it's one start. Okay, basically. So
They had to push back. They had to push back that second start some. They're going to mess up the whole rotation.
But I haven't heard about, you say automatic 10-game suspension. He could appeal it. Sometimes there are misunderstandings. The umpires have to validate their decision of kicking him out too. If Max Scherzer swears on his innocence, the umpires have to show why they kicked him out. But I will say this. Even if he had no substance on the glove, if they made it clear to him not to use the same glove, and he came out with the same glove, even though there was nothing on the glove, that's a reason to uphold a suspension. You can't decide you're going to do what you want when the umpires tell you, what you have to do.
Well, he said he swears it was just rosin and sweat. And I'm sure that that's exactly what it is. I mean, I can't imagine that pitchers are going to get whatever, but they said it was extra sticky. He said it's too sticky. You're out of here. And he flipped out like he was in the WWE.
I give the umpires a lot of credit because Max Scherzer is a future Hall of Famer, big name pitcher. Some umpires would get intimidated by a player like that. They'd maybe warn him and act a certain way, but to actually take on a big pitcher like Max Scherzer and hold him to the rules the way they did and eject him, it shows some intestinal fortitude on the umpire's part. So I'd give him credit. I have to assume the umpires made the right call. We don't know. Sticky stuff, substances, what he had in his glove, what he didn't have in his glove, what Scherzer's claiming obviously was legal, what he had. It could be a fine line which the non-player doesn't really fully understand, all the advantages and all. And I'm going to tell you, these umpires under a lot of pressure this year. I mean, they've had to adjust to the time clocks, to this, to that. And it hasn't been easy for the umpires this year. So a shout out to, Major League umpires, a certain appreciation of, the job they've had to do.
Well, Phil Cousy was the head umpire that day. Luckily, it wasn't Angel Hernandez because then nobody would have believed it whatsoever. But he was part of that crew, actually, Angel Hernandez. But Scott Boras, he decided that he wanted to get involved in this because he's the agent and blah, blah, blah. It's all, listen, I mean, sometimes you got to just deal with it. Had he not argued and been like, hey, you know what I mean? I don't know what you're talking about. It's the same stuff I use all of the time. And you're saying that it's extra sticky today. What do you think stickiness is going to do with the baseball? You know what I mean?
Well,
I don't understand that, but.
You mentioned Scott Boras. Of course, he has a big stake in Max Scherzer. This is Max Scherzer's second year with the Mets. He signed a year ago, okay? The year before last season, a record-setting 3-year contract, 3 years, $130 million, $43 million per year, 43 and a third, which was the highest salary, per year, per player, and still is. But Scott Boras had put in the clause, after the second year, he can opt out. So Max Scherzer can technically opt out at the end of this season, or if he doesn't opt out, he gets $43 million next season. Okay,
Right.
but if he has a great year, let's say Max Scherzer has a Cy Young type award-winning year. Scott Boras, worst case scenario, he goes to the Mets and he says, we won't opt out if you extend us a couple of more years at the big money. So Steve Cohen's liable to say, okay, 90 million for 2 more years, 135 million for 3 more years, just add to it, or he can actually opt out and
Give him 200 million for 3 years. Just give him all the money. Let's just do it.
It's insane. It's insane. You want to know something? If I'm the Met owner, Steve Cohen, who doesn't seem to have a care in the world about money, who seems to be a good guy, who feels, okay, the entertainers, I can afford to pay top dollar. I want to win a World Series. If I'm a Met fan, I'm excited to have Steve Cohen as my owner. And he seems to be very popular amongst the Met fan base because he puts his money where his mouth is. But if I'm Steve Cohen, I could also think, okay, let him opt out and whatever, and I'll see what's available in the free agent market, and I'll sign him then or whatever. I'll match the offer. And, there's so many options with a guy like that who's willing to spend the big money. That's what makes the Ohtani situation so intriguing as far as Ohtani coming to New York. Ohtani didn't want to come to New York. Or maybe he didn't want to play for the Yankees. I don't know what it was. But I'm going to tell you, Steve Cohen will outbid any other team. He has the money to do it. And if a team is going to offer Ohtani, let's say a 12-year deal, 11-year deal, over $600 million, Steve Cohen might go to $750 million. I mean, he might make it so lucrative where it's obvious the only reason Ohtani wouldn't come to New York is because he wouldn't want to play in New York. And that would be the sole reason. It wouldn't be a business decision. So take my word on it. If Ohtani isn't in a New York uniform, okay, it's not going to be a business decision. Because the business decision would be to take Steve Cohen's offer, whatever he's going to offer him at the end of the year when he's a free agent. It'll be because Ohtani wants to play in Southern California. And no, Pax, he's not coming to Philadelphia, no way. Don't even let them waste their time bidding, Anna.
First off, you don't know that at all. Because you're stuck up in New York and you think that the bright lights in New York just bring in everybody. Steve Cohen, last time I checked, he's got a whole bunch of these real high-priced pitchers that right now, but two of the big ones are out. The one guy's hurt, the other guy is now suspended, and the Mets ain't doing so hot. So he could spend all the money he wants. That don't mean he's going to do anything right.
But Max Scherzer says he's playing out his option. I mean, he opts out at the end of the year. Let's pretend. Now the Mets don't have to pay him the $43 million plus for the next year. And Justin Verlander, keep in mind, signed a 2-year contract, meaning after this year, the Mets just have to pay him for 1 more year. And guess what? You got Ohtani. You got a pitcher who at this stage I'm not saying he is, might be better than both Scherzer and Verlander. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't, because there's no evidence that Scherzer or Verlander have slipped in their performance, okay? Scherzer is still top of the line pitcher, still an all-star type Hall of Fame, on the way to the Hall of Fame. And Justin Verlander won the Cy Young Award last year. So he's just been injured. There's no evidence he slowed down, even though both guys are older guys,
Right.
But Ohtani, is one of the best pitchers in baseball, and you slot him into that.
You can say all you want. That doesn't mean that he's going to show up here or in New York.
No,
I think he goes to the Dodgers, actually, of all places.
He'd have to want to play in Southern California. The Dodgers are not going to outbid the Mets. If Steve Cohen he'll offer like $80 million more than the Dodgers, significantly more. Something, that'll make it hard for Ohtani.
You act like Steve Cohen is the only billionaire that owns a team. Oh, our owner, John Middleton's a billionaire. When you're not offering billions of dollars to
Steve
play.
Cohen's a 17 billionaire.
Doesn't matter.
17
They all
billion.
got billions of dollars, and you're not offering a $1 billion contract. You're not doing it. So it doesn't matter. They all got lots of money. It's not a big deal. So you just keep saying that Steve Cohen is just going to offer ridiculous money. He's a businessman. He's
Pax.
not going to do things like that.
Pax,
You keep saying it all the time.
Steve Cohen has a staff of guys who are experts on marketing. Okay, unlike you and I. No offense to you, and I don't know that much about marketing. I could just talk about the basics. Okay, but I can't talk about the hardcore dollars involved. And they sit down and they go over every possible scenario, the type of profit Ohtani could turn for the franchise, not just on the field. You and I could see what Ohtani could provide on the field, the GM, the wins, the losses, and all that stuff. That's the obvious. But what an Ohtani would mean for the franchise, the Asian population turning out, for TV deals, for this, for that, the souvenir shops, the tourists, everything involved. Believe me, and if he makes up his mind, we absolutely have to get Ohtani. If it's an extra 150 million I have to spend here, I'm willing to do it. Because in the long run, I'm going to get my money back. Also, one thing about contracts you got to keep in mind, we hear the term about players outplaying their contracts. But the high-priced elite players who sign a long-term deal, by the time they're at the end of that deal, their salary starts slipping. Even the great Michael Jordan, he signed a long-term deal. By the end of the deal, there were guys making more money. Even Patrick Mahomes, a quarterback, record-setting deal. And by the time he plays out his contract, there'll be a few quarterbacks not as good as him who are going to be making more money. Listen, that's why the Eagles were smart in a way to get this Jalen Hurts deal done. I think it was a good deal for the Eagles. Win-win for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles. Jalen Hurts, and I notice when we detouring Ohtani to Jalen Hurts, there's no rhyme or reason. We're all over the place, Pags. We're kind of like the 76ers,
Speak for yourself, because you're the one that segued. I didn't even say a word. You just started all of a sudden talked about Jalen Hurts' contract, which I was going to segue to anyways. Which I was going to segue to anyways, because he is now the second the highest paid player in the NFL. And I thought that the Eagles did do that right. The capologist of Howie Roseman, I mean, right now there's only 6 million part of the cap this year, 13 million next year, 23 million the following year, and like 30 million that fourth year. So I mean, he's really done amazing things being able to play with the cap and keep everything down so that he's able to get players around Jalen Hurts and go after this chip for a couple of years now.
Well, Jalen Hurts' deal was for $255 million if he plays out the whole contract, but $177 million are guaranteed. It's a 5-year deal. So worst case scenario for Jalen Hurts, you're set for life. $177 million for 5 years. Let's say Jalen Hurts, let's forget it, the injury factor. Let's say Jalen Hurts' performance slips. He's still an adequate quarterback if his performance slips. He's not going to be bad. Jalen Hurts isn't all of a sudden going to be a struggling quarterback a la Carson Wentz. I can't see him being to that point, but it's possible, not just with Jalen Hurts, with any quarterback, but in Jalen Hurts' case, that maybe he hit his peak last year. He had his best possible year, and maybe he'll slide back and be the type of quarterback he was projected to be coming out of the draft. An okay quarterback, a decent quarterback. Look, I projected Jalen Hurts when he came out of the draft to be another Doug Flutie. Okay? Now, Doug Flutie was a good quarterback. Jalen Hurts is better than Doug Flutie. Okay? He's better than Doug Flutie. But if Jalen Hurts is to slide back, and let's say he's another Doug Flutie, you could win a Super Bowl with Jalen Hurts. You could be fine with Jalen Hurts, have a good quarterback. And maybe you would be overpaying him a little bit, but it wouldn't be a disaster where you'd lose a great deal of sleep over it, okay? But if Jalen Hurts plays at the level he played at last year, instead of getting a little over $35 million a year, on average, he'd be getting $51 million a year. So it's kind of a good deal for both sides. And Howie Roseman, the GM of the Eagles, also understood you can't let this linger because the price keeps going up, on quarterbacks. It's like you're sitting in the taxi cab. You better know where you're going to immediately. You don't tell the cabbie, well, maybe go down a few blocks here, a few blocks there, because the meter's running, on quarterbacks. It just goes up. But at what point does it stop? Notice the Eagles made a commitment to Jalen Hurts that the Ravens didn't make to Lamar Jackson. Now, was the commitment made to Jalen Hurts because he's less injury prone, perhaps? He's a running quarterback. He got hurt last year. But why would the Eagles make that commitment to Jalen Hurts, but the Ravens wouldn't make it to Lamar Jackson? And don't tell me, Pags, well, Jalen Hurts has a better attitude, because there's no evidence that Lamar Jackson has a bad attitude. There's not really any evidence. He's been hurt. He's missed some time. Some people maybe whisper he should have been out there playing, but I don't know. Has it been a bad attitude on Lamar Jackson's part?
I think the Eagles gave him the money because, one, he's deserved it. He showed leadership, maybe even better than Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson has showed that he's able to win an MVP. Jalen Hurts arguably should have won the MVP if he did not get injured last year, and outplayed the guy who did win MVP as well, in the Super Bowl. So there's a lot to be able to be said for all that. But that being said, I feel like it's, he got the money because he is showing a certain type of leadership that only a couple of quarterbacks have shown. So that's why he deserves the money. And Chris, you're already late. You were late for the party. We already talked about Mad Max's ejection. We spent the first 20 minutes of that. You come in for the last 3 and then only hear about Jalen Hurts. We've been talking about Max for the last 20 minutes. So
now, if the Mets bet on Ohtani, you never know. The Eagles could detour to Max Scherzer. You can never tell. But with Scott Boras as an agent, if I'm an owner, I don't deal with Scott Boras, period. It doesn't mean I disqualify him. I tell Scott Boras, look, come in and see me at the very end, and you tell me what it's going to take to sign your guy at the end, but I'm not negotiating. I'm not bothering. I don't like dealing with you the way you do things. Case in point would be the San Diego Padres. They got Juan Soto. He's going to be a free agent after next season. Scott Boras already made it very clear they're taking him all the way to free agency. And so the Padres have one more year of Juan Soto after this one. They were thinking of putting together this offer that could go up to $500 million in total. But I don't know how, for a lot of years, obviously. I heard like 14 years or whatever. No, Scott Boras really doesn't want to do that. He likes to maximize things. And in fairness to Scott Boras, he's been very successful with his formula. But I'm going to tell you, one day this is going to happen, Pags. One of his high-profile guys is going to suffer a terrible injury, and that big mega offer, he's never going to get it. But the closest it came to a recent case would be Michael Conforto, the Mets right fielder. The Mets offered a couple of years ago Michael Conforto a 6-year deal, $20 million a year, $120 million. To Scott Boras, it wasn't enough. I guess he thought Conforto could be worth upwards of $30 million. Well, Conforto got injured. So Scott Boras did well in the offseason to get Conforto a 2-year deal for $36 million, $18 million a year. But the point is, Conforto loved being a New York Met, and that ship sailed, because they were holding out for the mega whatever. So,
Well, he did the same thing. He had the same problem with Bryce Harper. Bryce Harper wanted exactly what he wanted, and he couldn't do all the things he wanted to do with him, Scott Boras. Scott
they
Boras was
didn't
like,
get the
hey, we
money.
do the opt out. We should do the opt out. We should do the opt out. And he's like, no, I don't want to opt out anytime. I want to stay with one team for the rest of my career. End of story. And that's
Yeah,
that's
well,
what.
Bryce Harper, it was noble what Bryce Harper did. It was noble what he did. But I'm going to tell you, when Bryce Harper was a free agent, I thought he might command more money than he actually wound up commanding. And the Yankees, they didn't have the level of interest they should have had in Bryce Harper that maybe they should have. But I think in part that had to do with Scott Boras. The Yankees weren't about to drive the price up to Harper, get in a bidding thing, because I'm going to tell you, some people like to do business like this, Pax. It could be early in free agency. You call Scott Boras up and say, look, Scott, we want him. This is what we're offering. We're offering him a great, great deal. No matter what Bryce Harper would have been offered early in the process, Scott Boras wasn't going to take it. He was going to shop the guy to the very end. And the Yankees didn't want any part of that. They were turned off. And I think Bryce Harper, no offense, initially wanted to be a Yankee because I think he grew up a Yankee fan, but it didn't work out for whatever reason. But in fairness to Scott Boras, he was giving Bryce Harper good advice. It doesn't hurt. It helps. If he could get an opt-out clause, you take it. You just don't use it. You just don't use it. When it's time to opt out, you just say, no, I don't want to go anywhere else, or see what the team could do. See, will they extend me a little? Will they bump up my salary a little? So Bryce Harper actually had $330 million. The total amount of dollars were good, but it was over 13 years, about $25 million a year. So I look at it from the Phillies' perspective. They made a good deal because he was worth $30 million a year for 10 years. That's $300 million. And the last 3 years of the contract, when he's dragging, you could rationalize and say, well, we're giving him $10 million a year, but that's what we needed to do to sign him at the back end. So kudos to the Phillies, star player. On reflection, I wish the Yankees had been more aggressive, but I'm not faulting the Yankees because I backed their strategy at the time. Great signing by the Phillies.
Well, I agree, and now it's like I feel like that he is definitely, he's already. I feel like he's already paid off that contract, and everything that we're getting right now from him is all gravy. So that's just how I
He
feel
didn't
about
pay
it.
off the contract tax. He didn't give you $330 million worth. What are you talking about?
I feel like he's
There's
done
no way
already,
it's good stuff.
and just because you don't think so doesn't mean that it's not true. Like I think that he has. He's played here for 7 years already. He's absolutely done a lot. I mean, I know he's been hurt, but even when he was hurt
Has it
last
been that
year,
long? 7 years? Has it been that long?
yeah,
Wow, it's hard to believe it's gone by that quick. No, it hasn't
I
been
think this is
7 years.
his
I
seventh
don't
year.
think.
His seventh year as a
Okay.
Philly. So let's talk about other things that have been going on. Obviously, it's NBA basketball. And Chris would like us to talk about Draymond Green's suspension, that the Warriors, who are down 0-2 to the Kings, which has been a big surprise, and now Draymond Green is out for the next game, game 3, because he stepped on a player. And now, that when you think about all that stuff that happened with that, the one guy shouldn't, the guy who he stepped on shouldn't have grabbed his ankle. I didn't see the play. I don't know exactly what caused it all, but truth of the matter is that Draymond Green is a hothead, and Uh, sometimes when you're a hothead, you get in trouble, and that's what this is. So
I
he's
mean, I think part of the problem was after he got ejected, he played to the crowd, Draymond Green, like he was in the WWE. You don't do that. You don't do that. This is serious business. You're getting ejected. You go off the court. It didn't just like he threw his hands up at the crowd to gesture. It was a whole big thing. Now, Sabonis grabbed Draymond Green's leg, so he kicked him. You could say it's a knee-jerk reaction. So, Sabonis didn't get off easy. You can't grab a guy's leg. You could hurt him. Granted, he did it kind of instinctively when he was on the ground, but regardless, and once Draymond Green was kicked out of one game, to me, that was enough. You're kicking him out of the game, a playoff game. I don't think you add on another game into that, and they might say, well, his reputation is this and that. Yeah, he has a reputation, but then again, did he cause any type of injury to Sabonis? How hard did he kick him? It's kind of a gray area. I can accept the NBA's decision as well. In other words, it could have gone either way. He absolutely, Draymond Green, should have gotten kicked out of the game. I think this one game, but should he be suspended the third game of the series? I kind of, question that.
Well, listen, it's actually probably been the best series to watch. I think that it's been a surprise that the Warriors have not. The Warriors beat the Kings all season long. They went 4-0 against the Kings, and then the first two games of this series, the Kings have come out and beaten the Warriors, and now one of their biggest pieces is going to be suspended for Game 3. So I think that this series is over. I think that the Kings absolutely have to win this game because they can't not have Draymond Green and lose. If the Warriors win that game, the Warriors come back to win the series. I think that this is a big game for the Kings, and of course their coach, who just was the first ever unanimous coach of the year,
Mike Brown, Sacramento's coach. Yeah,
right? First
the
ever.
same Mike Brown, who LeBron James is very unhappy with at Cleveland. And I don't have proof per se, but, when all the rumors are going around how unhappy LeBron James was with Mike Brown at Cleveland, when LeBron James first became a free agent and we didn't know whether he was going to leave Cleveland, we thought there's a good chance he'd stay. The Cavaliers fired Mike Brown during that period. And I got the feeling it was to induce LeBron to stay with the Cavaliers. You're going to get the type of coach maybe you're going to like. So what happened after LeBron left and went to the Miami Heat? Like a year later, the Cavaliers rehire Mike Brown as their head coach? Doesn't that tell you something? It was kind of LeBron's fingerprints were a little bit on that. But then Mike Brown, ironically, the team that Sacramento's beating, the Warriors 2-0, he was Steve Kerr's main assistant with the Golden State. He was their bench coach. So you kind of wonder, does that give him a little edge knowing the guys just a tiny bit better, just a tiny bit, seeing them every day in practice, certain formations, what they can do? I don't know. Every little bit helps, but you say it right about Game 3 being pivotal. I think it comes down, if the Warriors are on shooting-wise, they should be fine. But the bottom line is they got to take 4 out of 5. They got to take 4 out of 5. And listen, in the NBA, the Warriors could go to Sacramento for 5th game down 3-1, and I still wouldn't count them out. I wouldn't count Golden State out at any point in the series as long as they win Game 3. If they fall behind 3-0 in this series, any team, that's a hole to be in. And Sacramento's just been solid this year. They haven't been spectacular. They've been so well coached. They've played well. This is a breakout time for DeAndre Fox, being in the playoffs for Sacramento. But Golden State is in trouble any way you look at it.
I agree. And you know who else is in trouble? Your Timberwolves
Yeah.
are about to yeah, they're down 2-0. They have not really shown much against Denver. It looks like that your see, you know, your finals is going to be beaten up here in just a little bit. You did have the Knicks on the other side. Is that what you had?
No. I had my beginning of the year prediction. I'm not like Mac who waits, whatever. Mac will let you know in 2 rounds when we're in the semifinals who he picked in the beginning of the year to go to the finals. That's when he first makes his pick when we're deep into the playoffs. I mean, but I picked the Timberwolves over the Cavaliers preseason. Let me just say this. I'm not going to count the Timberwolves out completely now. They're going back to Minnesota. I'm not overly impressed with this Denver Nugget team, knowing that their playoff history, they always find a way to lose in the playoffs. They never see, never get to the finals. So, let's wait and see one more game. If the Timberwolves fall behind 3-0, I'm going to acknowledge that they're cooked. But teams do come back from 2-0. But I can't say I'm confident with the Timberwolves. As far as the Cavaliers with the Knicks, Cavaliers did even the series 1-up. It was a resounding victory for them in game 2. I think they eventually prevail over the Knicks in this series. And what are the Knicks going to take out of this? If the Knicks do get eliminated in the first round, again, what do you take out of the season? You could say, oh, the Knicks have improved so much with Brunson. They're trending towards being a championship level team. But my thing is, really, guys, if they get eliminated in the first round of the playoffs, what have they really done on the year? I mean, I know there's been improvement, but nothing to get excited about. The bottom line is you got to advance. The same thing with your 76ers. Look, you know what they're doing right now with the Nets? These aren't real fights. These are sparring sessions, Pags. They are sparring. Maybe the 76ers will take their foot off the accelerator and the Nets might grab a game at the Barclays Center. At this point, I don't think so. But that's about the worst that's going to happen. And I'm going to tell you, I mean, the Sixers are locked to win this series. They seem to lock beforehand. But if this somehow goes 6 games, if the Nets rally and take them to 6 games and they scuff up the Sixers for the next series, that's bad. If I'm the Sixers, get this over with.
It's not even coming back from Brooklyn. They're not even coming back from Brooklyn. This series is over in 4 games. I thought the Nets were going to be able to do 5. They just don't have the reason why. Out of all the things, when you start talking about like that, the bench, the Sixers bench is beating the Nets. And they're actually beating the Nets starting 5. So it's like that's the reason why this doesn't even make it back to Philly.
You never know the mindset of players. Nets have a lot of young players, and sometimes the best thing young players could do, don't think about what's at stake. It's unimportant, the series. You just play for love of basketball. Won the court, we want to win. We show up at the arena. We're happy, the Nets. Let's say the Nets are down 3-0. They show up. They're happy. They're joking around. No one's tense. They go out. They have fun with the crowd, and they play for fun. They could grab a game just based on that. And the Sixers would be napping. Let's just get this. I know the Sixers' attitude now. Let's just get this over with. This is a pain in the butt having to play these games because it's inevitable. We're going to win the series. Why do we have to deal with this? It's like the Sixers are being forced to go into work when they don't want to, knowing they're going to get their check at the end and everything is going to be fine. But it's kind of like a bother in a way. The only redeeming factor for the Sixers is Brooklyn is close to Philadelphia. It's not like they have to get on a plane and go to the West Coast. So it's a short ride. And I can't. We're told teams shouldn't look ahead, but they're human. They've got to be looking ahead, to who they're going
But
to play in
the
the next.
hard part about looking ahead is who are they going to be playing? Because Giannis did not play in game 2. However, everybody on the Bucks did play, and they wound up routing Miami yesterday without Giannis. And is Giannis going to be able to come back in this series and take care of business against Miami? Because Miami, as of right now, is at least, like the last game they didn't do it, but I think they took their foot off the gas a little bit just because they took game 1 so decisively. So now they're going to go back into Miami tied against Milwaukee, and I think that's becoming a series as well. Is Giannis going to be back for game 3? And if he is going to be back, is he going to be worth anything? And can Miami actually maybe steal this series?
It's interesting. Let's say the way things are probably going to play out, my guess would be if Giannis comes back, he's okay. Milwaukee is most likely to win that series and beat Miami. Okay. So that would mean the Nick Cavalier winner would play the number 1 seed Milwaukee,
Yep.
meaning the 76ers in all probability are going to
We'll
play
be playing Boston.
It's up 2-0 against Atlanta. Don't even.
No, that series is over. I was hoping that Atlanta would give them a little bit harder of a series. I didn't care if it only went 4 games. I wanted Atlanta to battle them. I wanted them to be a little bit more beat up than they're going to be, and they ain't even doing that. That's like Boston is just all over them. They could have literally rested all of their starters for the 4th quarter, and still Atlanta wouldn't have sniffed them.
But if Miami wins, okay, if they upset the Bucks, which is a possibility, I'm not discounting that possibility, okay? If Miami does it, now we're going to have the Nick Cavalier winner playing the 76ers.
Celtics. Yeah, that would be correct. You're right. I'm sorry.
Right. Miami would be playing Boston. And if that happened, imagine if it's the Knicks and the Sixers. And I'm going to tell you, you could vouch as a Sixer fan. If that happened and the Knicks beat the Sixers in that type of playoff scenario, that is one of the worst blows in many a year for Sixer fans. I mean, to lose to the Knicks in that type of playoff round, 1 series away from going to the conference finals, I don't know what happens to that franchise, whether they do a complete rebuild around Joel Embiid or what. I know Doc Rivers would have to go. Even if the GM loved him and the owner loved him, the fan base would be so outraged. That would
he'd have to go. He'd absolutely have to go.
Again. If the Sixers lost the thrilling 7-game series to the Cavaliers, it would hurt terribly. But I think Sixer fans would be able to tolerate it just a little more than losing to the Knicks. Because something about the Knicks and Sixers,
neither one of them, if the Sixers were not to get out of round 2, and it doesn't matter, and I'm telling you, this doesn't matter if they're playing the Celtics, if they're playing the Knicks, if they're playing the Cavaliers, if somehow everybody comes back to win and they wind up playing Atlanta, it don't matter. They are going to fire Doc Rivers. They absolutely need to get out of the second round, and it doesn't matter who they're going up against. Doesn't matter.
Let's say they get out of the second round and they play Miami in the conference finals. I'm going to all the possibilities. And Miami upends the Sixers. The Sixers would be favored to win that series if that happened. And Jimmy Butler goes off, plays great. And the thought that Jimmy Butler was ours and we voluntarily basically let him go, that would be a tough one to swallow. I mean, if you lose to Giannis in the conference finals, a tough series, Giannis plays like the superstar he is, that could be tolerated a bit more.
A little bit. I agree with that. And to be honest, out of all of the teams, out of the top teams, I think that we would be able to match up best with Milwaukee. I think that Milwaukee is the one team that I think that we would actually have the best chance at. And I think that that would go 7 games. I think that would be a really great battle across the board. And yeah, I think that if that was the case in the conference finals, that Doc, if we were to lose that 7 game series in 7 games, that they actually show a lot of fights and it goes 7 games, that Doc would keep his job. I
Well,
think that
speaking of a job, James Harden's contract. Do you think the jury is out on the playoffs? The Sixers are watching him very carefully in the playoffs, how he performs. If he performs great through the playoffs, regardless of how the team does, they're going to give him the big, big contract? Or they just, is this a wait and see? Can you envision a scenario where the Sixers are going to say, going forward, he's not quite worth the money, they'll actually let him walk? Or have they invested too much in him to let him walk?
I don't believe they invested too much in him. When you look now and on the hindsight of that trade, where everybody said that, oh, Brooklyn won the trade, Brooklyn won the trade. Did they win the trade? I don't think so. I think that, that when all is said and done, you didn't really give up as much as you thought you did. And because of that, I think that if he was to want like ridiculous money, you can let him walk. Now, that being said, you got to replace him. You know what I mean? At that point, who are you going to replace him with? And that's the hard part. That's what becomes more of the issue. Who are you going to bring in on the backside of that? Because let's think about this in the opposite direction. Say the Sixers win the championship. Now are you going to, he wants to opt out because he's got his chip now. To be honest, I don't know that I want him back.
I'm going to tell you, the only way the Sixers can win a championship, if they have a healthy James Harden throughout the playoffs performing at a high level, he would be a main reason. Obviously, the number one reason would probably be Joel Embiid by far, but James Harden would have a major role in it. But, without him, they're not going to win. Maxey, Tobias Harris, minus James Harden, go all the way I'm talking about. He would have to, James Harden, kind of even turn the clock back a little bit, be a little more of a prolific scorer the way he used to be, in the past with Houston, that type of player. And in that case, they win a championship. Everyone is so giddy and happy. Maybe they give him the money, Sometimes you kind of reward a guy.
And that's why I wouldn't give him the money. You know what I mean? Especially if they won the championship, I wouldn't give him the money. Because it's now you're hog tying yourself. I know that you have Tobias Harris is going to be, his contract's going to be done, I think, next year, maybe even this year. It's like you're going to have Maxey. You're going to have to decide what you're going to do with him in terms of the money. It's like this is going to be, they have to kind of win it this year. And I think that if they don't win it, what are you really going to do? It's almost like everybody has already spoken with Harden, and Harden is going to be the guy who just automatically opts out. He's opting out. That he had a good enough season where he wants to opt out. We don't know that. We don't know that for certain. And I really believe that he doesn't opt out if they don't win the chip.
Well, what about this scenario? Make believe for one moment, Pax. You're the owner of the 76ers. Make believe. Your team has won the NBA championship. The door, there's a knock on the door. Who's that? It's Doc Rivers. You say, welcome in, Doc. You're smiling. You've won the NBA championship. He sits on the chair, puts his feet on your desk, and says, boss, I have a 5-year extension, big money, or I quit. Do you give Doc that big extension? The long-term commitment. 6 years, he demands. A 6-year extension. You've won the NBA championship.
If he just won the championship, I'd give him an extension. If he wins the championship, that's the only scenario that he does that. Because
let's
truth of
say
the matter is that even for big money, first off, coaches, big money for coaches is what, $10 million a year. So that's really chump change in the grand scheme of things. My thought would be is that if he wins the championship, yeah, give him whatever he wants because you can always fire him.
what's the line in the sand for Doc this year? If he goes to the finals, he stays on as coach. Going to the finals. If they lose in the conference finals, does he?
I think I think if he loses in the conference finals, depends on how he loses. Like if they get swept out of the conference finals against either the Celtics or the Bucks, or worse yet, Miami. You know what I mean? Like if it's in that type of scenario,
Yeah.
I think that he's gone. I think that if he does not get out of the second round, he's gone. That you
No
have
matter
to.
how they play.
It doesn't matter how they play. Like even a 7-game series against the Celtics, you have to get out of the second round. That's end all be all. Must get out of the second round. You cannot fall in the second round again. And that's the line in the sand for me. Now, is it the line in the sand for the Sixers? I don't know that answer. But listen, you gotta get us beyond where you have been able to take us every year. That's how I feel
Good
about
one.
it.
You know that the NHL playoffs are going on. I know you're not following it because the Flyers were nowhere to be found, in the playoff scenario. But
I sniff it a little bit. I sniff it a little bit, but
Flyers did improve a little bit this year. No one talks about them. There was a mild improvement,
no,
from
it
the
wasn't.
year
It was
before.
not an
Maybe nothing to
improvement.
get excited about. No, they were semi-competitive. They never made a serious playoff run, but they weren't a disaster. I mean, whatever,
That's coming from somebody who has no idea about hockey.
Right.
Truth of the
Well,
matter is that the truth of the matter is that when it came to the Flyers, I wasn't even blaming the play on the ice. The problem with the Philadelphia Flyers had to do with the culture starting from the very, very top of that organization. Dave Scott, who has just retired, and the reason why he retired is because when you are the president of an organization, you don't get fired, you retire. And if you feel like you don't want to retire, then you get fired. But he was about to get fired, and he's like, "Okay, I'm just going to I'm going to step away."
sure. But in some of the games, the Boston Bruins had a historical season, the most wins and points during the regular season in NHL history. They lost last night, game 2 of the playoffs to the Florida Panthers. It's 1 game apiece. They lost in Boston. They're going back to Florida. Not that big of a deal. To me, every game in the playoffs is important, best 4 out of 7. In this sense, I know it's a kind of contradiction for me to say no big deal than to say every game's important because you really don't have a lot of time. Now it's 1-up, and if you lose the next game, you're in some trouble now. But they kind of remind me a little of the Seattle Mariner team that won 116 games in baseball in 2001 and then struggled to get out of the first round of the playoffs, winning 3 games to 2 against an Indian team and then getting eliminated by the Yankees 4 games to 1. You kind of wonder, is this Bruin team going to follow that pattern? They've been so good during the regular season, or they just had like an off game yesterday. You don't know. They're human. They're entitled to lose a game. They're not going to be sweeping everyone through the playoffs. But now they face some pressure in game 3. And I think they have more. They and the Toronto Maple Leafs have more pressure than any other team in the NHL during this postseason tournament. The Bruins more so because of their historic run. But the Maple Leafs haven't gotten out of the first round in ages, and they got booed off the ice when they lost by a few goals to Tampa Bay a couple of nights ago. So they better bounce back, the Maple Leafs. I mean, they're really against it, and they're playing a good Tampa Bay team.
I disagree with your statement that the Bruins have more pressure than the Maple Leafs. The Maple Leafs are under serious pressure. They got booed off the ice in the first period, down 3-0. This is and they lose this series. They lose this series, and Toronto starts to go through the same thing that the Flyers are going through. that they just can't seem to get away from themselves. They blow the series is in the first round. When it comes to Boston, there's a reason why the Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy to win in professional sports. That you could do great all season long, like Boston has done. But when you're rolling over teams, you don't know where that second gear is, that next gear. And every other team is going to be able to put it into that next gear to go into the playoffs. And that's what Florida has done. Florida is a good team. They're not a great team, but they are a good team. And they could upset Boston. Boston isn't the end all be all. And it reminds me of a couple of years ago when the Lightning, before they went on their Stanley Cup runs, that they had like the most amount of points ever and stuff like that, and then they got swept in the first round. Now, obviously, Boston is not going to get swept because they did win a game, but I tell you, they're getting the hiney hole pucker now a little bit because Florida has won a game. You know what I mean? And that this was supposed to be the easy series. And now all of a sudden, life is going on. And all you have to do is beat one team. One team. You know what I mean? And it's hard to do that in 7 games, specifically in hockey, because coaches are good in NHL, and they are able to defend against certain things. And you look at the best player in the league, Connor McDavid. And here it was. I don't know what they did yesterday. Let me check and see what they did yesterday. But he had over 150 points or 150 points this season. And what happened in game one? They get beat. So it's not surprised. Let's see. Oh, Edmonton did beat the Kings yesterday.
Yeah,
So
but
it's
one team is going to merge out of nowhere, and it's going to be a major surprise, as the tournament goes along. I'll tell you, you kind of wonder the New York Rangers. They beat the Devils and they to go up 1-0 the night before last, 5-1. And the Devils admitted they were nervous. They were just too uptight because even though they had a great regular season that exceeded everyone's expectations, they're a very young team. They hadn't been in the playoffs before. And especially a lot of these kids growing up in Canada, they were in awe of being in the playoffs. And they just kind of, I don't want to use the term froze, but they claimed the moment seemed to overwhelm them. So you kind of wondered, maybe they get that out of their system. They were home and they were playing like zombies. I saw some of that game. They were
well,
getting
that's because
outplayed.
they're not used to having anybody cheer for them at home. So they had what, like 200 fans there, and all of a sudden that was like, whoa,
Yeah.
that's a lot.
I mean, that's discouraging. I remember going to a Ranger Islander game at the Nassau Coliseum when the Islanders played at the Nassau Coliseum. And I was astonished. It seemed like a Ranger home game. I'm walking in the lobby, all these Ranger jackets, this, that. It's like the Islanders had like a special section. And that's got to be demoralizing, like in your own building. The other fans are coming. I mean, it's rough. But listen, you have to develop your own fan base, but sometimes you can't, no matter what you do. They're playing in Europe, the Prudential Center. How many fans in Jersey are you really going to have who are going to be adopted as hardcore Devil fans unless they're introduced at a young age? But then it takes, 2-3 decades to develop them, the fan base. And these Ranger fans have been passed down from generation to generation. The fathers to the sons to their sons. It's like a culture going on. Like from being from Philadelphia, if another team came into Philadelphia to play, they'd have to start a whole new fan base, and they would get young people to follow them. It happens that way in 2 cities, even the Jets and the Giants. It's close. It's gotten tighter who has more of a fan base, but it's still the Giants because it's been passed on from generation to generation, a little more so.
Right. Well, no, and I would agree with that. I mean, you think about the Devils, if they weren't able to pull out a fan base when they had Martin Brodeur, then they're not going to be able to pull a fan base.
And 3 cups. 3 Stanley Cups.
Yep.
Yeah, they're not going to be able to at any point in this time because they've been around long enough and they've had the success. It's yeah, same with the Islanders. They're never quite. No one's going to be on the Ranger level in around the New York area. It's just what it is.
Right, right. And I feel like when you talk about surprises in hockey this year, the surprise team could be the Seattle Kraken, who upset the Stanley Cup champion Avalanche in
That's
Game 1.
terrible for hockey. That would be terrible for hockey. It would be a repeat of the Las Vegas Golden Knights winning, a championship right after, coming in as an expansion team. And the Kraken
They won't win the cup. They won't win the cup. I tell you, the Hurricanes are too strong of a team. Even the Rangers are too strong of a team. I think that the Rangers could be a surprise team. I am a big fan. I'm not a Rangers fan, but I am a big fan of Zibanejad. I think that he is a great player. He's probably the most underrated player in the NHL in total. And then when you have Shesterkin, and I'm killing his name there.
Shesterkin carried them in the past.
Right.
Could he carry them, through the playoffs? I mean,
I
they
agree.
counted too heavily on him before.
Well, they have a little bit more scoring power now. And I think that that's part of what could help the Rangers. Are the Rangers good enough to win the cup? I mean, if they go up against the Lightning, the Hurricanes, or Boston, I don't know that they have enough firepower. It would rely more on Shesterkin to be able to do that. But I don't think I don't think that they have enough. They still need another piece to be able to do that. They need some scoring from their defense, and they don't have that right yet. But I mean, the Lightning is still, a force to be reckoned with, just because they're used to being there. They know how to turn it on. I'd be interested to see when they beat the Maple Leafs, because they're going to beat the Maple Leafs, what that series is going to look like against Boston. Because there you're going to have the team that's been to the Stanley Cup Finals for the last 3 years against the best team in the NHL this year. I think that that's going to be a really great matchup. I think the Avalanche will be able to get above the Kraken, but we'll have to kind of see as that series goes on. They play again today, and of course the Kraken are up 1-0, and then the Golden Knights, who have had a great season all the way around, are down 1-0 against the Winnipeg Jets. So either way, all of that's going to wind up being a little bit of a fight for them as well.
And you wonder, we talk about rebuilds with the Islanders. It's easy to forget the 2 years that the Tampa Bay Lightning won the Cup. The Islanders extended them all the way, in the conference, finals. With a little more push, it could have been the Islanders winning, 1 cup, if not 2, during that time. And then they didn't make the playoffs last year. They kind of rebounded this year. And then to lose to the Carolina Hurricanes the way they did, they were down a couple of goals. They rallied to go ahead. The Hurricanes tied it, and then the Hurricanes beat them in overtime. And now the Islanders are down 2-0. When you wage a comeback like that, and you look like you're going to grab a game, and then lose it and you're down 2-0, I imagine that's got to be deflating because, you really got the Islanders are going home, to the UB, their arena, but down 2-0 to the Carolina Hurricanes. I just don't know. It looks like it's going to be one and done.
I agree with that. So, hey, we are at the top of the hour. Let's take a quick commercial break, and we'll be back right after all of these commercial messages.
Trisha's having a sleepover tonight. Can I go?
I wonder about Lucy's friends. What should I say? I know you're only 10, but one of these days a friend will offer you a drink. And alcohol at your age can lead to so many things. None of them good.
So can I go to the sleepover?
Lucy, I want you to promise me
I
something.
finished my homework.
Bigger promise. If there's any drinking, I want you to say, "No thanks, not my thing."
Mom.
I promise you. Your real friends won't care. Deal?
Sure.
Really?
I promise, Mom.
They really do hear you.
Did you pack your toothbrush?
For tips on how to start the talk, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. A public service message from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
Supporting the needs of our veterans. That's the goal of all of us at Team AmVets. Like Mitch, Carlos, and Kevin from our Welcome Home team that brings furniture to our vets.
We are Team AmVets.
Or Linda from our thrift stores who brings you great bargains every day.
I am Team AmVets.
And John, who picks up your thrift store donations that support California veterans programs.
I am Team AmVets.
Visit our website or a Team AmVets thrift store to donate or shop today.
Join the team!
Mr. Green? Mr. Green?
Yeah.
You need any help? I just want you to know, I think you're the best ever.
Yeah, sure.
Want my Coke? It's okay, you can have it.
No.
Really, you can have it.
Okay.
A Coke and a smile makes me feel good. Makes me feel nice.
Be around.
That's the way it should be. I like to see
Hey, kid.
the whole world smiling with me. Coca-Cola as life. Have a Coke
Wow,
and
thanks, Mean Joe.
smile.
I mean, you can see right now, without LeBron, Lakers are struggling.
Let me tell you about a team I hate, all right? I know the Dallas Cowboy fan is here, so I had to make sure he knew how much I hate this team.
I'm ready. I've often said that the people who run baseball, they try very hard to ruin it.
I'm from Brooklyn. I don't have a problem saying it to his face. Oh, I'm from Brooklyn. Hey, get us an each.
And welcome back to the Mac and Jack show, our second half of the show, as we talk about everything that's going on in the world of sports. You know, as I'm looking back here and just seeing all the different things that are happening beyond just the first, just the major news. One of the things that I saw that really angers me, actually, is that the Oakland A's have purchased land in Las Vegas for a new stadium. And I am not a big fan of that. I would much rather Major League Baseball bring in two teams and have the A's stay in Oakland, because I feel that that owner is a terrible owner, and there shouldn't be a reason that he gets rewarded with being able to move his franchise to Las Vegas. And I would much rather see Major League Baseball bring in two more teams, one team on the American and National League now, because ultimately, we're playing everybody now, so who cares? Instead of having 30 teams, moving it to 32 teams and not rewarding Oakland, who has been a dismal franchise with the ability to move cities.
Well, they have been dismal as a team, and how many fans are going to want to show up if your team has no hope, or no realistic chance of winning? But it goes on all the time. Even successful franchises move. I mean, the Oakland Raiders going to Las Vegas. I mean, the Oakland Raider fans are very supportive of their team. And they go to Las Vegas. I mean, I can't justify that. That bothers me. But what do you do in the case if an owner does everything within reason, but the city doesn't help out at all? In the case of Art Modell, when the Cleveland Browns moved to Baltimore, reportedly, he tried his hardest And the city of Cleveland, they accommodated the Indians. They did what they had to do with the baseball team, but they allowed him to be in this old, dilapidated stadium, and there was no help at all. Look at the most famous case of a team moving, the Brooklyn Dodgers, even though I know I'm going back, past the 1957 season. With the Brooklyn Dodgers, Ebbets Field, their stadium in Brooklyn, was getting old. It wasn't an ideal place, even though it was a treasure, an intimate stadium. They needed a more modern stadium. And the guy in charge in New York, someone named Robert Moses, who was in charge of building and everything, he offered the Dodgers a brand new stadium in Queens that turned out to eventually be Shea Stadium. We didn't know it would be named Shea Stadium at the time, but it was supposed to be on the property in Queens. And Walt O'Malley said, how can we call ourselves the Brooklyn Dodgers if we're playing in Queens? Okay? They still would have been the Dodgers, and because of the lack of cooperation of the city, they didn't want to build something by the train yards in Brooklyn where there was some property. The owner, Robert Moses, was stubborn, so Walt O'Malley moves the team to Los Angeles, and he became the most hated owner in the history of sports. More so maybe even than Art Modell was, but you could argue however you want. But the point is, can we totally blame the owner if he's getting no cooperation at all from the city, the state? I mean, some cases it would be outrageous. Look at one of the great fan bases in all of sports right now. I'm sure you would agree. The Buffalo Bill fans. One of the great fan bases. I'm never going to say who's the best because you're always going to go with Philly Pax. I'd never put you in that spot. But imagine the Buffalo Bills aren't getting accommodated, anything with a new stadium, and they move to, let's say, wherever, to Toronto, for argument's sake. What would that, imagine the uproar of the Bills, what it would do to that community, losing that team. But then the question should come up, Pax, how obligated should the city and state be? How obligated do taxpayers want to be? Your tax money, you want it going to a team. There are a lot of people who don't care about sports, and they'd be outraged that their taxes are being raised for like a sports team. It's a kind of tricky question.
When you it's funny that you didn't mention the one team moving that I think was actually more maligned than everybody else that you just mentioned. Maybe on the same par as the Dodgers. Baltimore leaving to Indianapolis. That was a big deal for Baltimore. But Baltimore, they just slipped out in the night, and it's like, what just happened there? And that guy was hated for a long time. It's
Pax. I'm sorry to cut in. The names change. Someone taking the name too. That's what bothers me. I'll give Art Modell credit for this. When he moved his team from Cleveland to Baltimore, he left the name the Browns behind. They weren't called the Baltimore Browns. When Baltimore left to go to Indianapolis, they kept the name the Indianapolis Colts. We shouldn't have a team called the Baltimore Ravens, Pax. They should be the Baltimore Colts.
Well,
that's what
so actually that was a concession that was given up by Art Modell. He said that, listen, it's like, we're not going to come to an agreement here. I have to move this team. I have to move them. I will release the name that the Browns will always be in Cleveland. Because he wanted it. I mean, you think about all the things that were going on with Cleveland back then too. I mean, they had gone to a number of conference championships and never made it to a Super Bowl. He wanted to also change the dynamic.
Super Bowl since the history.
They still have not.
They have never gotten to a Super Bowl.
But now Modell has won two.
They've only gotten to one. The Lions haven't gotten to any.
Right. So and Modell's now won two with the Ravens. So
he's won one with the Ravens.
Well, the Ravens have won two.
Well, they won 2. Yeah, right. I think he's not alive. So he wasn't for the other one. Yeah.
Right.
The
So
Ravens franchise. Yeah, but you know what gets me, Pax? The complete hypocrisy of fans, the complete phoniness of fans when things like that happen. And let me explain, okay? The Ravens, meanwhile, the Baltimore fans, they are pouting and crying when their team goes to Indianapolis because they were great fans, the Baltimore Colt fans, great, legendary fans. So they're pouting, crying, and complaining about it as they were entitled to do. But of course, when they could get the Cleveland Browns to leave Cleveland, they put up an offer. They welcome them with open arms. They go out of their way to get another franchise to leave their city to come to them. So they're doing to another city what was done to them. So I don't want these fans complaining. You mean to tell me if Oakland can get another franchise, they wouldn't take them? But sometimes you wonder these moves good. The LA Rams, it sounds like Los Angeles, wow, a glamour city. That's where you want to go. They would have been, the LA Rams went from LA to St. Louis back to LA. So technically they're LA's team all along. They just had a big stopover in St. Louis where they won a Super Bowl and went to another one. But they would have been better off just staying in St. Louis, not coming back to LA, because they had a really good fan base in St. Louis. They're great fans. And in LA, the fans are different. Look at the San Diego Chargers. What the heck are they doing as a second team in LA? They got no identity in LA, none at all. At San Diego, they had an identity. And I don't get it. You're leaving San Diego because they're small market. But then again, the Padres can afford to pay all these big salaries playing in San Diego. There's no talk of the Padres leaving there. I just don't understand some of these moves, especially a selling out, TV revenue. I just don't get why they move. I think once in a while, it's where the owner wants to live. Remember the movie Major League? It's all fictional. But the woman was the owner, and she's joking around, but she's talking about moving the Indians to Florida. She has her mansion in Boca Raton, so, because you're living and you're going to be near your team. Because if you own a team, you can't be too much, I think, of an absentee owner. You can't be in Florida 11 months out of the year and then come to Cleveland for 1 month and tidy up business and then go back. You usually want to be around your team, around the offices. You don't have to be in the office each day, but you want to be around, you don't want to be too detached.
Right. No, and I agree. And it's funny that you bring up that movie because ultimately that's, it was that movie that actually spawned teams actually playing in Florida. Not that the Rays or the Marlins have even gotten very much of a fan base. I mean, the Marlins did win a couple of World Series, and the Rays have been to the World Series a couple of times, but they still have a difficult time, getting people into those stadiums. I look at this, when I think about football and how these teams have moved around, and you're right, I think that San Diego should have been, shouldn't have moved. The move into LA was ridiculous to me because LA doesn't have a fan base. The LA cares about the Dodgers and that's it. They barely care about the Kings. They have a hard time selling out an 18,000 seat arena for the Kings. They care about the Lakers. They barely care about the Clippers. So you got the Lakers and the Dodgers, and that's it. That's what happens in LA, in terms of sports.
But what bothers me, these cities who have the second teams, I'm not a big believer in it, but once you have two teams for a while, I'm not for getting rid of one for another one moving if the fan base is supporting the two teams. As you just mentioned, the LA Clippers, wouldn't they be better off in Seattle? Okay, who once had an NBA franchise? I mean, them playing in LA, playing second fiddle to the Lakers?
Well, you know what? It's funny because the Clippers own the stadium. It's the LA Clippers stadium that the Lakers play in. So that's the funny part about that. So
Well,
you have
Lakers
to
are
move.
not going to move. The Lakers are one of the great sports franchises. The LA Lakers, to lose that can't be. Look, in New York, the teams are supported. The Mets are supported. The Yankees obviously are supported. They have strong fan bases. It wouldn't make sense for either to move. I mean, the Knicks and the Brooklyn Nets, I'm going to tell you, if the Brooklyn Nets ever moved, it wouldn't be considered a sports disaster for the city. I think the city would be fine. The Knicks are an establishment. They can't move no matter what. They have to be there. The Knicks are too much entrenched. Like the Rangers are too solid. If the Islanders moved, they've got a nice little fan base, the Islanders, but it's very internal. It doesn't go into the heart of the sports city like the Rangers would. So, you know, the Giants and the Jets, they have their fan bases at this point, but they're not even, you know, the Giants and the Jets play in Jersey. That doesn't make sense. They're considered New York. You know, they're like shared with New York and New Jersey. They're called the New York this, New York that. We look at them as New York teams, and it's so close to the city, you know, too.
Right.
But, yeah.
So let me ask you this. If Brooklyn was to leave, because Brooklyn's having a hard time, you know, selling out that stadium as well, where would they go? My first thought, there's two cities that come to mind right away. Pittsburgh, which I don't think can really, I mean, I think that's too small of a spot for them to really have a basketball team, or Baltimore, which again is really close to Washington and Philly, but I think Baltimore could stand alone and house a basketball team. They don't have a hockey team, so it's not like that. You have football and you have baseball, and that's it. So could you put a basketball team there? Probably. The Wizards are terrible enough that you probably don't get a lot of people from Baltimore liking the Wizards. So those are the two cities that right off of the top of my head could be a landing spot for the Brooklyn Nets if they were to move.
I don't think it would be prudent for the Nets to move anywhere. Brooklyn is a very nice place to play. They're in a beautiful arena, the Barclays Center. It's just the buzz the Nets are going to create never quite going to match what the Knicks do. Listen, we had all this drama with Durant and Kyrie, but imagine we had that drama if they won the Knicks. It wouldn't be just on the back page of sports pages. It would be on the front page of the news. Somehow, if they were Knicks, it's a little different. There's nothing that compares to playing on a championship level at Madison Square Garden. And we haven't had that since, you know, well, we got to the finals a couple of times since they won it in the 70s. But something about the Garden when it's buzzing heart of Manhattan, you know, it's kind of like a special place.
So let me ask this question. All right. Different season. We're not talking about this season, obviously. The Knicks stink. Don't make the playoffs. The Nets wind up in the number 2, number 3 seed, wind up going into the conference finals. Do the Nets say, hey, listen, we want to play at a little bit bigger venue. Let's bring it to Manhattan?
No. Barclays Center is a beautiful venue. That's a non-issue with the Nets. The Nets on the threat to move. But you wonder about certain cities that don't have NBA franchises. You gave a couple of examples, Pittsburgh or Baltimore. You think maybe it could work out, but you're skeptical. Toronto Raptors are more popular in Toronto than the Toronto Blue Jays, okay, right now. That's at least what I hear. And the Blue Jays have a darn good team. What about Montreal? we've kind of forgotten about Montreal. You know, they lost the Expos. Imagine, and that's a major city. Imagine the Nets went to Montreal. Would they create the type of buzz in Montreal that the Raptors are doing in Toronto? Very strong fan base, exciting. The young people would take to them. Would they be appreciated more in Montreal than they are in Brooklyn?
I don't know about Montreal, but I would think more in Quebec. I think Montreal is owned by the Canadians and the Alouettes. You know, I mean, we never talk about Canadian football, but the Alouettes are a really big deal up there. They couldn't handle baseball. I don't think they could handle basketball. You know, I just don't see that in Montreal. However, I do see it in Quebec. Quebec doesn't have any major franchises. They do have a major, it's the capital of Canada. You know what I mean, up there. So there's a lot to do, and there's a lot of people there. And I think that would be the city that would handle having a basketball team. Since they do play hockey in there, but that's all minor league hockey now. They do have a Canadian football team. But having an NBA team there, I think, would work. Obviously, Vancouver didn't work.
Buffalo, they went, they had a franchise that they lost. You know, Bob McAdoo was one of their stars ages ago. Could Buffalo support an NBA team? I mean, they certainly.
No. And I'll tell you why not. Nobody wants to go live in Buffalo. And for the season, it's way too cold. It's way too. The reason why a football team works there is because football is over February. The worst part of the weather. I mean, the Sabres are there, obviously, but from February and March, the Sabres play a lot more away games than they play home games. And I think that's part of the big deal. Like, that's why it would be hard to get a free agent to want to go to Buffalo. You know, football is one thing because there's only so many jobs in football.
A player is going to go anywhere if it's an iconic franchise. A case in point would have been Green Bay. Maybe not at this moment, but when Green Bay was contending for the Super Bowls with Aaron Rodgers as their QB, it was a destination place. A player look and say, wow, Green Bay could win it. They got Aaron Rodgers. They got this. They got a really top team. They'll want to go there and play there, all factors equal. I mean, they'd rather go there than play for a doormat franchise. If the Jets were playing very poorly and the Packers were playing great with Aaron Rodgers, a free agent might think, I'd rather play for Green Bay. I don't want to play, for the Jets, even though it's located around New York. And we're in a day of social media, Pats, too, that players don't have to run out. They just need a couple of nice restaurants for dinner, and then they could stay inside and play on their laptops, get all the movies, Netflix, this and that. There's enough to keep them entertained. They just need a couple of local clubs they could go to, and they'll be fine. But that's the thing about that. Like, when you have that type of money, you can make the club that you want to be. You can make the club. That's why all these sports stars start restaurants, because they wanted a place to go eat and they made one. You know what I mean? So they made the place to go eat. Getting off that, in 1 week, we're going to have the NFL draft. Do you pay attention to the mock drafts much? Do you look at them? Are you amused by them? You take them seriously, or what?
I listen at arm's length. I think that they don't, that nobody has an idea beyond the first couple of picks, that nobody really has an idea. I have been thinking about, of course, what the Eagles are going to do. And, I'm going to be there at the draft. I am not necessarily a draft guy in terms of knowing who all the college players are coming out. I believe in, hey, this is the need that team has, and this is who they should take in regards to that in terms of a position or positions, not the player. So I feel that if if a team is choosing the correct position, then there's a 50-50 chance that that guy's going to work out there. Obviously in the draft, you never know who you're getting and what the cause of this is. I feel that they have gotten better at this. You don't see as many busts.
You see, I'll disagree. You see your good share of mistakes being made in the draft. And I think it's because of the combines. They see players go to the combines. One player shows more athletic skill than the other player. And all of a sudden he goes up, they line him up to run the 40. One guy's a fraction of a second quicker than the other guy. One guy's had a little bit of a better vertical jump. One guy makes a spectacular catch. Never mind that he'll have a case of the drops otherwise, but he shows a certain athleticism and he goes up and down the board, and it drives me crazy. It shouldn't be a factor in the early rounds. I could understand rounds 5, 6, or 7. You take a flyer on a guy. He shows amazing athletic ability. He might look like a diamond in the rough. So you maybe move him up a little bit. But even the quarterback position, I mean, they tend to overthink things. I mean, and I can't believe the reports that I'm hearing. Bryce Young reportedly is going to be taken first. Now, I'm okay with that, even though I wouldn't take him first, because I think he's going to be an outstanding quarterback, Bryce Young. He's going to work out. I don't think you could go wrong with Bryce Young. But I hear Houston, Texas going second, might be passing on C.J. Stroud. They might be taking Will Anderson, an outside linebacker. And this is a team that badly needs a franchise quarterback. Now, if he wasn't an elite franchise quarterback, C.J. Stroud, I could understand them doing it. I'd even support them doing it if it was like Malik Willis was on the board, the second best quarterback who isn't that good. I wouldn't go with a quarterback in that case. I would take the best player. But C.J. Stroud is the real thing. He's going to be a star in the league. He's going to be outstanding. I mean, worst case scenario, C.J. Stroud is going to be another Kirk Cousins type. He'll still be good enough if he's not outstanding. He's still going to be worth the selection. But these teams are overthinking things, and I just don't like it.
Well, I think that there's talk about all these players. I think that's part of the problem, that there is lots of talk about all the different types of players, and that's part of the issue. Is that, like, for instance, the Eagles at number 10, and of course I can only speak about the Eagles because I hear about it all the time and we talk about it all the time on my side of things. I don't have enough time to try to figure out what anybody else is going to do. But that being said, everybody keeps talking about this running back for Texas, Nijan or whatever his name is, and I think that the Eagles are using that as a rouge. I think that they're going to trade out of that number 10 pick, and they're going to trade down to the number 15 or 16 pick, as far as I'm concerned, is that's what I believe. And somebody's going to move up into there to either take that running back, because they're building up the running back.
John Robinson, yeah.
Bijan Robinson.
You don't know what these picks. I was joking around about my co-host Mac, but Mac nailed it a couple of years ago when they had all this talk about all these quarterbacks with Trey Lance, Zach Wilson, and company, and all these guys. It was Mac who was saying none of these guys are good to be drafted that high. Like Trey Lance, he thought was awful. He wasn't high on Zach Wilson. Yet Zach Wilson went number 2 in the draft. Trey Lance went number 3. And in large part based on the combines, not what they accomplished in college. Based on the combines, and teams want a certain position player, especially a quarterback, so badly that they're going to reach on him. Now the talk is with this Anthony Richardson coming out of Florida, because he's been so outstanding during his time in the combines. He's interviewed well, but he hasn't played well in college. So you're judging, this guy's got potential. He's going to carry the clipboard for 1 year. and then he's going to be this type of outstanding, quarterback. And I just don't go for it. Get the best players available. The only position I could understand by need is sometimes quarterback, but only if the quarterback is nearly as good as another position player. Look, if I'm the Kansas City Chiefs, and by some chance, if I were picking 3rd overall instead of Arizona, I'm not going to draft a quarterback no matter how good he is. I'm going to trade the pick for something else. But we'll see that the Eagles trading down makes sense. If you could trade from 10 to 15 and get a second rounder, and chances are you look at the whole list of players and say, look, I got a bunch of guys lumped into one category. I'm good with any one of these guys. Then you trade down, then you're going to get basically the player of your choice and additional draft capital.
Right. And I agree with that. I think that they only have 5 picks so far this year. That trading down makes sense. And I love how Howie does his things with it always seems like he's raping the other team. And I don't know that that's real or not. Obviously, the other team is
that's not the best term to use. Make it, let's.
He's always screwing over the other team. That's what it seems like to at least us here, that we wind up getting a lot more than what we would have expected to get for that pick. And truth of the matter is that the other team's got to make the deal too. So it typically does work out for both teams. That being said, it wouldn't surprise me for the Eagles to trade out of there and move down to the 18th or 20th pick. Now, I think that by moving down to the number 16 pick, I am a firm believer. There are only 4 types of player that you pick in the first round of the draft. You pick offensive linemen, defensive linemen, cornerbacks, or quarterbacks. That's it. That's all that you get, because that's everybody else is more of a thing. Now, as you get later in the draft, you get around 28, 29, 30, 31, 32, the last 5 picks in the draft, you could then choose to go for like a running back or something like that because of the way the rules are, and you get that extra year. But that's only that special occasion do you want to use that extra spot, that extra year of eligibility to hold them, because there in the longest of terms, you could hold that person for 7 years rather than 6 if you franchise them twice.
I think you should think so far ahead. To me, you take the best player. If you have a dynamic running back, why think, running backs, I could get them anywhere. Let me build up the offensive line, this and that. You have if the running back is one of a top 5 player in the whole draft, I take him. Why wouldn't I take him? I'm not,
because he's not, the value of the running back position right now is overvalued. That I think throughout the league, it's overvalued. And we could talk about Saquon. Saquon is a prime example of that, is that without an offensive line, you wind up getting your running back hurt all the time.
You know what annoys me about Saquon Barkley? He was picked 2nd overall by the Giants. And people are trying to point out, oh, what a mistake. They needed this or that. It wasn't a mistake. Saquon Barkley's been outstanding for the Giants when he's been there. He's their best offensive player. To me, the pick was validated. Look, during that draft, the Browns took Baker Mayfield first. The Giants took Saquon Barkley after. What was going to be, with the Jets? I mean, look what the picks afterwards. Sam Darnold with the Jets. I mean, come on. That didn't exactly work out that great.
I think about who was the offensive lineman in that draft, the first offensive lineman picked in that draft, who was the first defensive lineman picked in that draft. That's where I go. I don't think you're right. The quarterbacks, unless you are in absolute need of a quarterback, And the Jets are always in absolute need of the quarterback. That's the problem with the Jets franchises in total. They're always looking for a quarterback, and until they get that quarterback, they're going to always have an issue.
What is
So,
plan B for the Jets? This Aaron Rodgers situation. I don't like what's going on as a Jet fan. I didn't like it from the beginning. If you can't come to an agreement on an Aaron Rodgers deal in the beginning, this thing has been lingering on, and both sides aren't looking elsewhere, supposedly. That's what makes it interesting. No one is bluffing anyone else. The Jets aren't saying we're looking elsewhere if we can't make a deal. And the Packers the same way. It's like they don't want to tick off Aaron Rodgers, anyone. Because Aaron Rodgers might suddenly say, I'm going to report to Green Bay. If I got to be Jordan's backup, I'll be his backup. They don't want to tell one of their iconic players, stay home. And they can't. They have to pay Aaron Rodgers. If he shows up at camp, that's a pretty expensive backup quarterback, I'll tell you. So they're in the spot, and the Jets don't want to tick off Aaron Rodgers by saying they might look elsewhere.
It's funny because I'm assuming this is Mac or Linda, one or the other, that's saying that he goes to the 49ers. I wouldn't. That's not an unrealistic thought process at this point now. I wouldn't be surprised to see a major flurry of action on next Wednesday about this. That either that gets done, or that I would not be surprised if you saw something like this happen where Rodgers goes to the 49ers, that the Jets overpay maybe 2, possibly 3 first-round picks for Lamar Jackson.
But Rodgers can kind of detour, saying he doesn't want to go to the 49ers. He's already said he wants to go to the Jets. He made it clear that's what he's looking for.
He wants to go somewhere else. That's where he wants to go. He wants to go somewhere else, and he wants to compete for a championship. That's really, let's face it, Rodgers he's still a competitor. He still wants to be able to play on a team and be able to get them to the promised land. He's going to have, imagine the 49ers with Rodgers. The 49ers right now, I think, are the 3rd favorite in all of the NFL to win the Super Bowl. They would jump to number 1. They would jump above Kansas City right now, because it's like,
but if he wins the Super Bowl with the Jets, do you know how big that is for his legacy?
Oh, but if he wins another Super Bowl in general, it'll be big for his legacy. It doesn't matter where he's at. His legacy is going to be his legacy no matter what.
A little more in New York. Look at the case of Peyton Manning. He won one at Indianapolis. He won another one with Denver. So it's good he won 2. But when we now talk about the short list of greatest quarterbacks of all time, Peyton Manning is in the discussion, of course, but virtually everyone is going to pick Brady over Manning based on the amount of Super Bowls, okay? I mean, how many people are going to say, well, Manning was the greater quarterback of the 2? I mean, if they had to rate him, who goes ahead?
No. And the reason why I would always put Brady above Manning is because Manning, when it came to big games, never came up as big as he needed to. I know he won 2 Super Bowls.
Was it his fault?
Some of it was. And you even go back to bowl games. He was never he was a great quarterback, but when it came to big games, he would start overthinking. And I think that was part of the issue. He would start to overthink himself, and that become a problem. So that's why I put him down as a second tier to Brady, to even, to Montana. You know what I mean?
So I think Brady and Montana in one group, the 2 of them together. Does Johnny Unitas join them, or is he considered from another era, even though he's the beginning of the Super Bowl era?
I would say that he probably is there. That he probably was a great enough quarterback. Now I don't know his body of work because it was before my time. But
won 2 NFL championships before the Super Bowl, and was on 1 Super Bowl winner Yeah.
And also played great when he wasn't winning Super Bowls. So it's like there was, in the time of quarterbacks back then, he was a great quarterback back then. So I got to imagine that he was of that same ilk. Now,
Yeah.
because it's before my time, I can't really say that because I don't see his body of work. I can only go by what he's done as a quarterback, and what he's done kind of puts him into that elite status.
What about
Specifically
Dan
because
Marino? Dan Marino,
So-
no Super Bowl wins, went to only one, and is good at pure pass as anyone, yet he's not quite in the discussion.
right, because he also had his set of problems. When it came to big games, he would come up a little small. And you could say that he didn't have the receivers, but I mean, I remember Super Duper and those other guys that were on that team. I mean,
Mark
he had a Hall of Fame coach, he had a Hall of Fame talent around him, and he is a Hall of Famer. But it's like, you can kind of like even putting Breeze in that same. Breeze won one Super Bowl. You know what I mean? He won the one, and that brings him above Marino a little bit. But truth of the matter is I put him and Marino in the same class.
But you know who we completely ignore? And to me, he's not one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, but he was a heck of a quarterback. Terry Bradshaw, 4-0 in Super Bowls. Same record in Super Bowls as Joe Montana, yet no one puts him into the Montana category. Is it because Joe Montana could pull out games at the end, thrilling finishes, like that went back to college in the Cotton Bowl with Notre Dame? And then, of course, and against the Cowboys in that famous playoff game, and to lead the Super Bowl drive to upend the Bengals. He didn't quite need that. And it seemed that Bradshaw was surrounded by so many more great players. I shouldn't say so many more, but it seemed he had legendary players around him with the Steelers.
When you think of the Steelers Super Bowls, Super Bowls, what is the first thing you think about? When you think about all the Steelers Super Bowls, what's the first thing you think about?
The Iron Curtain.
The Steel Curtain. The Steel Curtain.
Steel Curtain. I'm sorry. But then you look at the players he had on offense around him.
Lynn Swann, Franco Harris. I mean, he had a great offensive line in front of him too. I mean, so there's a lot. There's a lot that went in, and I think
Troy Aikman was 3-0 in Super Bowls. Okay, close, but we don't put Aikman in the all-time great category. We put him like that little level below. We even put Bradshaw and Aikman behind Brett Favre, who didn't have that Super Bowl resume. But
you know what? And you want to know why I think that is? When I think of Aikman and you look at Aikman's numbers, I mean, they were good, but when you're thinking about great quarterbacks, when we're talking about elite quarterbacks, they're more pedestrian. And you think about, that he had one great receiver, he had a couple of good tight ends, but he had an amazing running back. That was taking most of the load a lot of the time. Yeah, so that's why I think that, again, he falls into that category, because when you think of the Dallas Cowboys team, you think of the big three. You think of Aikman, Irvin, and Smith. That's why because when you think of Joe Montana, you think of the catch. They don't call it the throw, they call it the catch. But and he had great players around him. He had Roger Craig. He had Clark. He had Jerry Rice. But Joe Montana also played against really good teams and had to do drives and do stuff like that. Think about John Elway. John Elway was worse, in terms of you think about like how many Super Bowls he lost in comparison to what he won.
He won 3, and then he won 2. Over there, what was in the news? I'm detouring a little bit because you mentioned Michael Irvin. Michael Irvin hasn't gotten reinstated by the NFL Network yet, but they are paying him, so they're not liable, I guess, with any lawsuit, because he hasn't gotten fired. He just hasn't been allowed to be on the air. Now, there's a school of thought, well, the Marriott, who has some lawsuit with Michael Irvin, is one of the sponsors. So it puts them in an odd position. And also, Michael Irvin's past has been a little bit checkered. You know, there have been some incidents on and off. But the thing about Michael Irvin with this case, if Michael Irvin admitted to drinking too much, and and if you're being employed and you're working and you go out, I don't want to hear that you've drank too much. Even if you didn't say such and such to the lady or whatever, we don't know. It's a bad look. It's a bad look. I'm employing you. You're part of my network. You better be responsible how much you're drinking. You better be back to your room at a decent hour if we need you to be up the next morning, for work. So I just don't know where this case is going with Michael Irvin. Could he, what he may have said, what he didn't say, how it came across. I mean, I'm willing to give Michael Irvin the benefit of the doubt right now. I really am. But he's kind of not quite in the clear because this thing hasn't gotten resolved. If there was a mistake going on, it should have gotten resolved. Somehow, he's suing the Marriott. The Marriott isn't giving in right now. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. They're privy to information, the NFL, their offices that we're not privy to, okay? And it's not a comfortable situation. And the longer Michael Irvin stays off the air, and he hasn't been back on ESPN on First Take going at it with Stephen A., it doesn't look so good, okay, all around. Now, I don't know where this is going to wind up. I don't know where it's going to wind up. But, I don't know what to say about it anymore.
It kind of is a shame because I liked listening to Michael Irvin. I mean, obviously he knows a lot about football, and even though I may not have liked him as a player on the field, he was very influential in the way that he talked about the game, and he always had a respect and a love for the fans, which I really do appreciate. And I think that that's something that's looked over here in the midst of some of this. I don't ever want to say that out of all the things that people have done, that this seems very benign. You know what I mean? In comparison,
well, let's say he said something to the young. Let's say he said something to the young lady that was improper.
Well, hey, listen, it could have been off color in a lot of different ways, and I'm not talking about the actual, I'm not talking about in that type of, in a racist sense. I'm just saying that it could have been anything. He could have been inappropriate. He could have said, hey, you look real sweet, mama. You know what I mean? Like he could have said anything that she could have taken the wrong way.
If he made a pass at her, saying, hey, come up to my room, blah, 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 blah. It could come under the category of being distasteful, but she could easily just walk away from him as well. And is she offended by a guy coming on to her a certain way? Some guys are a little lewd the way they come on. If he did, what we saw on the tape visually didn't seem to be...
Even if he was saying the absolute worst things in the world during that time, it was so soft.
If he's being nasty, what's his tone? If his tone is being nasty, or I want to do this to you, and it's coming off like as a harsh sexual tone, I don't like it, and it's unacceptable. And it could be reason for him to be let go if he's coming across that way. If he's coming across, other ways, I want to know his tone, this and that. Or did the Marriott overreact on this? That's a question too. And the Marriott's in the spot. You want to know why? Because if a female employee comes and says someone that made certain remarks, a sexual remark to them, and in this day and age, if they ignore it, the Marriott could get in trouble for ignoring something like that. So sometimes you feel obligated to report a certain thing that's said, because we're in an ultra-sensitive society where you could get in trouble for something. So that the safest way to go is just to report everything. And the safest way to go might be to just cancel someone out. And that's what we talk about, the cancel culture, which I'm disgusted with to a large degree. A guy's career should not get ruined over a remark he could make. Sometimes you're joking around, you're giddy, you make an inappropriate remark. It could be towards any group of people, which is unfortunate, okay? But you shouldn't get canceled out. You shouldn't have to go through the whole thing.
Right, but that's the society we live in now. Now that it's a lot easier to just cancel somebody than, and think about how big of a deal it was when Jimmy the Greek said what he said. And looking back at it, it was like, it was insensitive, it to a certain extent. But he was, they canceled him right away. They says, okay, you're no longer able to do this. And he didn't really even mean to be mean-spirited when he said what he said. You know what I mean?
It's intent. It's intent to whether someone is being mean-spirited, whether they just make an unfortunate remark. The guy's name, what was it, Miles Leonard or something on the Miami Heat, said something that would be an anti-Semitic remark, but he didn't even know it was really exactly anti-Semitic. He made a remark. He was somewhat ignorant towards the remark he made, and he sincerely regretted the remark he made, by all accounts, really sincerely regretted it. But he was forced to take sensitivity courses, this and that. You can make a remark not thinking much. You know what it is, and it could come out of your mouth, and it doesn't mean you need to take a sensitivity course. You sit down with the person. If they're sincere about the apology, they really didn't mean it. Oh, I'm really sorry I offended people. I feel bad about it. That's enough. That should be enough. But if you have a history of a certain conduct, that's another matter. Unfortunately, Michael Irvin, there's a history of erratic behavior going back to the time he was a player. And, does that factor into it? And listen, the announcer of the Sacramento Kings, DeMarcus Cousins, kind of set him up saying, what do you think of the Black Lives Matter movement? And he tweeted back, all lives matter. And that got him fired as the Sacramento Kings broadcaster. If that's the only thing he's done in his history, reprimand him. Say, listen, you got to understand, it's insulting to some people to say all lives matter. You don't do that, And if that's his own, but to fire him, his whole career goes down the drain for that remark. I can't go for it.
I would agree with you. So, and I guess we'll see, because ultimately football season is going to begin. He's always been a very big part of the draft. Michael Irvin has been one of the guys who's usually doing day one. So the fact that he's not doing day one is going to be interesting, who they're going to put in his place, because he's usually one of the hosts of day one of the NFL draft. So I got to imagine somebody's going to be there in his spots, obviously, but it's a shame. And we're going to find out. I mean, I'm not heartbroken about it. I'm going to still move on and still live. But, ultimately, I agree with you. I'm not a big fan of the cancel culture and the way that it does things right now. But that being said, we are at the top of the hour here. And so we're going to be done for the day. If you are in Delaware, Newcastle, Delaware today, I am going to be a celebrity bartender doing some charity work for the Eagles Autism Foundation over at Klondike Kate's. So come check me out there. We're going to be there from 6 to 10. A lot of Eagles cheerleaders, swoop, lot of Eagles fans going to be there, all at Klondike Kate today from 6 to 10. Otherwise, Jack, thank you very much. And we will be back tomorrow where Mac will be the host again. And I'll be coming on along with Byron and everybody else that shows up. Everybody have a great Earth Day and take care.
Okay.